messed up. Okay, remember, we're going to start out by reviewing some of the things that we talked about in chapter 11, because it does provide extremely important information for what we're going to be doing in the future. We're focusing on, or the first part dealt with understanding the cost that a firm encounters. And then we have started looking at profit maximization. What does the firm have to do in order to not just make a profit, but maximize the profit that it can earn? Because I mean, it doesn't want to be haphazard and just make decisions without understanding the consequences. It wants to understand how its decisions will affect its profit, and then it wants to make decisions that will give it the highest profit that it can. In this chapter, we are focusing on highly competitive markets. We've said that there are some things that we're going to be talking about that apply to all firms, like the cost of production. That applies to all firms, no matter what kind of market it is. But then there are some things that will be different if you look at different kinds of markets. The extreme examples under what's called perfect or pure competition, that's a market where you have lots of firms. They're all very small, or generally they're very small. They're producing identical products so that consumers don't care who they buy from. We said under those conditions, firms are called price takers. That means they simply take the market price as a given. They don't have any control over what price they're going to charge. The opposite extreme from that would be monopoly, where you only have one firm, so that firm is the market. Okay? There is no market price. For monopoly, the firm faces a downward sloping demand curve, and the monopolist gets to choose what price he wants to charge. If he lowers the price, he can sell more. If he raises the price, he gets more dollars per unit, but he doesn't sell as many units. So for the monopolist, his decision is somewhat more complicated. That's why we're starting with a highly competitive market, because this is the easiest kind of market. The other two market types are called monopolistic competition and oligopoly, and we'll get to them later. Let's see here. So when we're talking about a highly competitive market, and in many ways, the market for oil is highly competitive, not in every way, but in many ways, you do have lots and lots of producers. And so if you're a oil producer and you own a few oil wells, then you're a tiny part of that market. And so you don't get to decide what price you're going to charge. World conditions determined by market supply and market demand determine what I told you things go wrong. Today these paragraphs pop up. I'm sure there's a way to prevent that from happening. I haven't found a way to do it yet. So it's going to be an annoyance that we'll have to deal with today. Anyway, in a competitive market, you've got the overall market conditions. That's where the price is determined. Okay? And then you have the individual producer. You got lots of individual producers. So here we're assuming that the price of oil is $50 a barrel. Anybody know what the price of oil is today? I haven't looked. I've been busy, haven't looked the last couple of days. The last time I did look, it was around $22. So that's, as we said, prices communicate information. That's that the world price of oil has dropped from 50 to 22 is an indication that big things have happened. And that's the lower price of oil is reflected in the lower price of gasoline. Okay? All this different activity is connected, and the connections are maintained through prices as long as prices are allowed to go to their their market levels. So here we have competitive market. In total, producers are producing 82 million gallons or barrels. And in total, at this price, consumers want that quantity. That's the market situation. For the individual firm, they say, well, I'm tiny. I have to charge the market price. And as long as I do, I can sell as much as I want to sell. So the individual firm says, I face a completely horizontal demand curve. And if it's completely horizontal, what does that tell you about the elasticity of demand for this producer's oil? Is it highly elastic or highly inelastic?
Highly inelastic.
Now it'd be highly elastic demand for for your oil. You're one producer. If it's horizontal, then that means elasticity is very, very high. As long as he's charging the market price, sell as much as he wants. If he raises his price to $50 and a penny, he can't sell anything. Okay? So it'd be highly elastic. It's always good to go back and review these terms that we've used before. Okay. So we've said that for every firm, no matter what kind of market it is, certain decisions they have to make. They have to decide, what price am I going to charge? What quantity am I going to produce? And should I produce at all? The firm has the option at every point in time to produce, to go out of business, or to shut down temporarily. And we'll be talking about how a firm makes those decisions as we go along. Here we have, I think we spent some time going through this earlier. We said that, actually, I'm gonna skip ahead for a minute. We said that in order to make maximum profit, the firm wants to produce every unit where the marginal revenue is greater than or equal to what? What does he compare marginal revenue to? Marginal cost. In thinking about, do I want to produce this first unit, the second unit, the third unit, and so on? Every unit, he applies the same rule. If I produce this unit, how much is it going to add to my revenue? Remember, marginal revenue is defined as the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. It's the extra revenue the firm gets if it produces an extra unit. Okay? That these ideas that we're covering they're very basic, but they are so important. Having a good understanding of these basic ideas is critical. And there's nothing more important than understanding marginal revenue. Marginal cost, we said, is the change in total cost over the change in quantity. It's the extra cost the firm incurs if it chooses to produce an extra unit. So when we say they want to produce every unit that has a marginal revenue greater than or equal to marginal cost, think about what that means. It means they look at every unit and say, if I produce you, how much will you add to my revenue? And how much will you add to my cost? And every unit that will add more to revenue than to cost, the firm wants to produce that. It produces that unit, and then it looks at the next unit. It says, should I produce you? And asks the same question. And as they continue producing more and more, marginal costs gradually start to go up. And ultimately, they will reach an output level where the marginal revenue and the marginal cost are exactly equal. that is the unit that it's going to add the same amount to their revenue as to their cost. And so they're really just breaking even on that unit. They're actually indifferent between producing that unit and not producing it. But our convention is to say they're going to go ahead and, if they're indifferent, they're going to go ahead and produce it. So you want to understand these two things. They're going to produce every unit that has a marginal revenue greater than or equal to marginal cost, and they're going to stop when they get out to the level where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Question about that? Okay. And that's what we're seeing here. For a competitive firm, their marginal revenue is just equal to the price. Now remember, the marginal revenue is defined as the change in total revenue over the change in quantity. That's the definition of marginal revenue. However, for a price taker firm, we can also say that marginal revenue will be equal to the price. And that's just because the price taker doesn't have to lower his price to sell more. So here the market price is $50. So if he produces the first barrel, he brings in $50. So his marginal revenue is 50. If he decides to produce a second barrel, well, now he's selling 2 units at a price of 50. So his revenue goes from 50 to 100. His marginal revenue is 50. Every time he sells an extra unit, his revenue goes up by the price because he's not having to cut price. And that means his marginal revenue remains at $50 no matter how much he's producing. Now, if he expanded an exorbitant amount, if he starts producing 80 million or 8,000, 8 million, 16 million, if he starts becoming producing so much that he's a significant part of the market, then he would no longer be a price taker and his marginal revenue would no longer be equal to the price. But we're assuming that these firms are price takers and they're going to stay price takers. Okay, so marginal revenue, this green line here is the demand curve for this producer's product. Shows that he can sell any quantity he wants as long as he charges the market price, and his marginal revenue is the price. So this horizontal green curve here, it's the marginal revenue curve. It is also the demand curve for this producer's product. For the first unit, if he decides to sell it, it'll bring in 50. Marginal cost is way down here. His profit will go up by this amount, so he wants to produce it. So he looks at the second one. Same thing is true. MR is greater than MC, so he produces it. And as he continues to expand, notice what's happening to marginal cost. It's getting higher and higher. Gets to the 7th unit, marginal revenue is 50, marginal cost is about 40, but his costs have gone up, but he's still making more profit on that 7th unit, so he wants to produce it. But if he produces the 8th unit, the marginal cost is 50, the marginal revenue is 50. He's actually indifferent between producing and not producing that unit, but our convention is to say he's going to produce where MR equals MC, which is exactly at that point of intersection. And when he does that, recognize that on that very last unit, on the 8th unit, he's not making any profit, right? But he is making profit on all the first 7 units. So even though he's making no profit on the very last one, his profit is the highest that it can possibly be. You need to see that from the graph, and then also down here from the numbers. When he looks at each unit and tries to decide should he produce or stop there, he's comparing his marginal revenue with marginal cost. 50 and 40, he wants to do it. 50 and 6. All of these, he's making profit on each of those. So he keeps producing until he gets to 8, 50 and 50. By producing that one, doesn't add anything to his profit, but he did get profit from producing each of these initial units. So he's going to produce here. If he expanded out to 9, his cost would go up by more than his revenue, so his profit would go down. He's not going to produce that 9th unit. Okay? And that's what this is saying up here, that if the firm were producing, say, 10 units, they're producing too much, and so they would get more profit if they cut back. If the firm stops anywhere in here, they would get more profit if they expand. And so the logic of that shows, where they want to be is right here at where MR equals MC. Okay? Question about that? Okay. And this is making the same point just a little bit differently. This, if you were given this graph and ask, how much will the firm choose to produce if the market price is 50? You would just say, well, if the market price is 50, then this firm faces a demand curve that is horizontal at $50, and its marginal revenue curve will also be horizontal at $50. It's going to produce where MR equals MC, which is going to be right here. So if the market price is 50, this firm will choose to produce 8 units. That's what we saw in the previous graph. What this is also saying, though, is what if the price goes up? It was 50, goes up to 100. That would be because of something happening in the world market for oil. Maybe demand increased or supply decreased. If that happens, what will this individual producer going to do? Well, now he says, wow, I can sell as much as I want at a price of $100 per unit. My marginal revenue is now $100 per unit. So the MR curve is now going to be here. He's going to apply the same rule as before, same rule as always. He wants to expand out to the point where MR and MC are equal, which is going to be right there. That's where his profit will be at a maximum. Notice, because the world price went up from 50 to 100, this individual producer responds. He was producing 8. Now he's going to expand and produce, looks like 9.5, something like that. Okay, the producer is getting the message that oil is now more valuable than before, and he's responding by expanding his output. Notice he doesn't know why. He may not know why the price went up. He doesn't need to know. The rising price tells him produce more. Same thing would be true with something like the mask. If those were produced in a competitive market, then when the demand for these masks went up, the price would go up. As the price goes up, producers have an incentive to respond and produce more. They don't even have to know why more masks are wanted. All they have to know is that the price went up, and we can we can trust that they will respond to that because they have an incentive to respond. It is in their interest to produce more. When we keep the price down, as the government is doing now, we are preventing producers from getting the signal that the mask is more valuable. We are preventing them from having a greater incentive to produce, and so we are not going to get as many being produced. If we want to maximize the amount being produced, we let the price go up. Okay. Questions on that?
Would a similar thing happen if the prices went down? Would the marginal revenue still equal the price?
That's a very good question. Um, Here, the price start out at $50. And what I mentioned earlier was that the price is now somewhere around $20. Okay. Um, Oil is not as much, that's sending a message that we don't value oil as much as we did before. And the falling price communicates that to producers. When the price was 50, the producer had an incentive to produce 8 units. When the price goes down, because the demand for oil has gone down, at least largely because the demand has gone down, the producers don't have to be told, you need to cut back. Okay? When they see the price has fallen, they get the message. And when the market price is now 20, their marginal revenue is now 20. Right? So before, when the price was 50, the producer had an incentive to produce 8 units. Now that the price is 20, he's going to revisit that decision. The 8th unit he was willing to produce before, but now that 8th unit adds $50 to his cost, only 20 to his revenue. So he's going to lose $30 if he produces that unit. So he's not going to produce it. He's going to cut back. Same thing for the 7th. Marginal cost is way up here. Marginal revenue is down here. It's no longer profitable to produce that unit. So he's going to shut down. And the firm is going to continue applying the same logic. It's going to produce where MR equals MC. And so that means that the firm is going to cut back and only produce 4 units. And a little bit later, we'll get to the question of the shutdown decision. What this point is telling us is that if this firm continues to produce at the lower price, they are going to produce 4 units rather than 8. It's very possible that it's likely that many of the producers will say, it's not worth it to produce at all, and they will go out of business. But we can't get, we're not ready for that question yet. But anyway, answer to your question is yes, given that the price has gone down, this firm will cut back on its output, and other firms will do the same thing. And so the total amount produced is going to drop. Okay. All right. Okay, now here, same basic information, except now we're bringing in profit. We've been talking about profit. We've said that the firm is trying to maximize its profit, but we have to remember, how do we calculate profit? Let me use the symbol pi to represent profit. Okay. It is the difference between the firm's total revenue and the firm's total cost. Profit is just, it's what's left over. The revenue is the dollars coming in. Total cost is the cost that the firm is losing because of operating its company. So it's what's left over. It's the residual. And we said we can also write profit as being the difference between price and average cost times the quantity. Price is how many dollars how many dollars the firm receives when it sells an average unit. Average cost is the cost they incurred to produce that average unit. So this difference would be the profit the firm is making per unit. Multiply that by the number of units, and it gives you the total profit the firm is receiving. Really important to remember, you never use this equation to figure out the quantity that will give maximum profit. If you want to determine where profit is maximized, you have to look for where MR equals MC. If you want to calculate the profit that's being earned, then you have to use one of these two equations. And often this is the equation that is more helpful. Here we see that they have added in an average cost curve. Okay? Important to recognize that average cost curves will have this general shape. Okay? Notice the marginal cost curve. As the firm is producing more and more, marginal costs tend to go up. Okay? The more you're producing, the higher the marginal cost of producing an extra unit. Average cost is very different. You can see it's downward sloping at first, hits a minimum, and then it becomes upward sloping. And that is one thing you want to remember. Our typical marginal cost curve looks like that. Our typical average cost curve is going to look like that. The reason for this has to do with, remember we talked about fixed cost and variable cost. The firm's total cost will equal its fixed cost plus its variable cost. Remember the difference between the two. Fixed costs are fixed. They don't vary as the firm is expanding. Variable costs do vary. Okay? Notice down here, well, they don't give you the variable cost here, but actually you can calculate what is this firm's fixed cost from the chart.
The fixed cost looks like it would be $30.
The fixed costs are $30 because you see that even if this firm shuts down and doesn't produce anything, it's still going to have cost of $30. Okay? Its variable cost then would be the costs that vary with output. So the variable cost of producing the first unit would be 4, the increment there. Variable cost of producing 2 would be, would be 10, okay? The 40 minus the 30. Variable costs are just total cost minus fixed cost. Why is the AC curve, why does it have this shape? That's what we were talking about. Has to do with fixed cost. If you only produce 1 unit, then that $30 is spread over only 1 unit. If you produce 2 units, then your fixed costs are spread over 2. Your average fixed would be 15. If you produce 3, then you're spreading that $30 fixed cost over 3 units. You produce 30 units, then your average fixed cost would be 1. So as the firm is expanding, its average costs tend to go down because it is spreading those fixed costs over more and more units. That's why the curve is negatively sloped at first. Why does the curve then start to become upward sloping? What's causing that?
Maybe it's because the firm starts losing money as the variable cost goes up because of the marginal cost.
It's because that's the key thing, the marginal cost. You see here, the marginal cost of the first unit was 4, second unit 6, 11. As it produces more, marginal costs are getting higher and higher. And so the rising marginal costs, as we see, marginal costs keep going up. At some point, those rising marginal costs cause the average cost curve to start rising. Notice that point there, okay, corresponding to that point. Okay. Two things to notice about that point. Okay. Average costs at that point are at a minimum. Okay. As we were expanding, average costs were falling. If we continue to expand, average costs start going up. That's the lowest level average cost will hit, corresponding to this. Okay. Notice all the way out to that point, average costs were falling because marginal costs were below the average cost. Okay? You produce the first unit, marginal cost is here, average cost is way up there, so that by producing that first unit, it's bringing the average down. Just as if, on exams, if you have a 90 average and then you make an 80, well, your average goes down because you have your marginal score was below your average. If the firm produces the fifth unit, well, now the marginal cost is above the average. And so that high marginal cost causes the average to start to go up. So this is the reason why the AC curve is negatively sloped at first, and then eventually, because marginal costs exceed the average cost starts to go up. It is important to have a comfort level with these cost curves, because their shape is going to be very important. And generally, for almost all firms, the marginal cost curve will look like this, and the average cost will look like that. We will talk about something called a natural monopoly later on, but apart from that, cost curves will generally look like this. Okay. Notice if the price is 50, the firm gets maximum profit by producing where MR equals MC, which is going to be right here. We've already seen that's at 8 units. Okay. How much profit is the firm making? Well, you take the price, 50, subtract the average cost, which we're told is $25.75. So this gap represents the profit per unit. Okay. We're calculating it here. Okay. They're making that on 8 units, so you multiply by 8, and that gives you the total profit of $194. Okay. And we see that right down here. Okay. Price is above average cost. They're making profit on the average unit. That doesn't mean they should expand, okay? Because in determining how much to produce, you always look at MR and MC. And by producing where those are equal, that is maximizing this profit. If the firm produced more or less, the area of that profit rectangle would be diminished. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. And this is presenting the same information a little bit differently. You got the average cost, marginal cost. If the price is 17, the firm's going to produce 4 units. The firm's not going to make any profit because average cost and price would be the same. If the price is below average cost, then the firm is going to be losing money. For example, if the price were $4, then if the firm is going to produce, best they can do is to produce at A, where they'd be producing 1 unit, but they would be losing money because their average cost for that quantity is way up here at B. Okay? This gap would be the per unit loss multiplied by the number of units. They would be losing this much. If the price is above average cost, then they're going to be making a profit. So this is showing you at different price levels, whether they're making a profit or a loss. Okay. Here, this is showing us all of the firm's cost curves: marginal cost, average cost, and here we're introducing average variable cost. And that is just a curve that's taking their average variable cost is defined as total variable cost, all the costs that vary with output, divided by the quantity. Remember, anytime you find an average, you're taking the total and you're spreading it evenly over the number of units that you're looking at. Notice that just as the average cost curve has that U shape and it intersects the marginal cost curve at the average minimum, the average variable cost does the same thing. ABC is U-shaped, it intersects marginal cost at the minimum point for average variable, and then if the firm continues to expand, then average variable starts to go up, okay? We can use, hold on. We can use this graph to identify the supply curve for an individual firm. Okay? We haven't discussed that previously. We have talked about the marginal cost curve, but now we're going to say that the supply curve of the individual firm, okay, the curve that shows us how much the firm will produce at different prices, is just going to be a portion of this marginal cost curve. Think about why that is. Let's say the price is up here at $50. Okay. What's the firm going to do? Well, first thing, and notice the process we follow here. The first thing the firm is going to do is determine what is the profit maximizing quantity. If the market price is 50, then the demand for this firm's product is horizontal at 50, and that is also the firm's marginal revenue curve. Where is it going to produce? It's going to produce here, where MR equals MC. It's going to produce whatever this quantity is. We'll just call it Q0. If the price is 50, is there any chance that the firm will say it's not worth it to produce at all? Any chance the firm would shut down?
No chance.
No chance, because this at $50, this firm is going to be making profit. Okay, how do you know? Well, profit is, as always, price minus AC times quantity. As long as the price is greater than average cost, you know the firm is making positive profit. And what does positive profit mean? We're talking economic profit. Positive economic profit means the firm is not only covering all of its explicit cost, it's also covering its implicit cost. And it means that even after covering all those costs, the firm still has something left over. So this situation is describing a firm that is doing better producing in this market than if it produced in anywhere else. How do we know that? Well, because for this quantity, the firm's average cost is here. So they're making per unit profit of that amount. And if we drew a rectangle here, that would give us the profit. So main point here, if the price is 50, the marginal cost curve is showing us the quantity the firm will produce. That is a point on the firm's supply curve. What if the price were only 45? Well, now the demand curve faced by the firm and the marginal revenue curve would be there. MR would be equal to MC there. The firm would produce a slightly smaller quantity. Okay. Is the firm still making profit?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And how do we know that? Because given this price, they're going to produce this quantity. And if they produce that quantity, their average cost is here. So they are making profit, which means this is a point on the firm's supply curve. So now we've identified 2 points on the firm's supply curve. If the price were 44, 43, 42, we would identify other points on the firm's supply curve. So it's beginning to look like the firm's supply curve is just the firm's marginal cost curve. But we have to consider, what if I'll get rid of all that. What if the price does drop to where it is now, about $20? And here's where you got to be very careful. If the price is here, make sure you know the sequence of decisions the firm makes. They ask, well, if the price is 20, how much should we produce if we're going to produce anything? And they're going to produce where MR equals MC, which is right there. So the quantity they will produce is here. Let's just call that Q20 for $20. Okay. That is the quantity that will give the firm maximum profit if they produce. But then the question is, well, are they making any profit? Okay. And at that quantity, we've got to know their average cost. How do we find the firm's average cost?
We look at the average cost curve.
We look at, and this is the critical thing, we look at the average cost curve at the level of output the firm is now choosing. So notice the sequence. We were told the price was 20. We then figured out if they're going to produce anything, they will produce 20 units. We then said, well, if they're going to produce 20 units, what's their average cost? So we read up to the AC curve. And what we see is that the firm's average cost is clearly a lot more than $20. Let's say it's $35. So this gap then is no longer the profit. Now it's the loss the firm is going to earn if they produce this product. And the revenue we could create here, or the rectangle, would be the amount of loss that the firm is going to experience. If the firm is in this situation, are they going to produce Q20?
No. The average cost is too much compared to what they're getting out of it.
That's right. 20 or Q20 is the quantity that will give them maximum profit if they produce at all. But here we see that they are losing money. We got to be careful. If they expect this to continue, if they expect price to be below AC, which means profit is negative, if they expect that to continue in the future, there's no point in continuing. They're going to go out of business as soon as possible. And so this point is not a point on the firm's supply curve. All of these points were points on the firm's supply curve. All of these down here are not going to be. What about these points in between the AC curve and the AVC curve. Well, that's slightly more complicated. We've got about 90 seconds. Let's see if we can do that. What if the price were in here at, say, $33? Okay. If the price is at 33, then that means the firm can sell as much as they want, as long as they charge the market price. Their marginal revenue is going to be 33. First question we ask is, well, how much will they choose to produce if they're going to produce? That's going to be here. We read down. So okay, that's the quantity they will produce if they produce, given that the price is 33. Okay. Are they going to be making money? No, they're going to be losing money, okay, because their average cost is up here. So average cost is maybe $34. Price is 33. If this firm produces, it's going to lose money. Should he continue producing? Okay. Well, the concise answer would be, if he believes that these conditions are going to continue in the future, then he will choose to just go out of business. But what if he believes this is temporary and he thinks the price is going to go up in the future? Well, under those conditions, he doesn't want to go out of business. He wants to stay in business, even though he's going to be losing money. So in this situation, the question becomes, is it better for the firm to produce in the short run, even though he's losing money? Or is it better for him to shut down temporarily? Okay. If he produces, he's going to lose this much per unit. And he's going to lose, that rectangle would give you the total losses. Okay. But at 33, in the short run, he needs to think about, what are my variable costs? His variable costs are down here. Looks like around $21. So with the price of 33, the firm is more than covering its variable cost. So this is kind of a weird situation where, even though the firm is losing money, if they think that things will get better in the future, the firm will be better off continuing to produce, even though it's losing money. If price is at least AVC, then the firm has an incentive to produce, which means that the supply curve will include all of these points on the marginal cost curve all the way down to here. Okay. This is the supply curve for the individual firm. It does not include these points down here. Okay. We covered that quickly.